Normally it will remind you as it comes up, so just wait a second to make sure it's recording properly. Okay, so thank you all. So brief introduction of who we are. So my name is Russell Moore. I'm legal director at the law firm Ashfords, specialising in data protection technology. Delighted to be co-hosting this webinar today with Chloe Parker and Paul Wright of AB Brand and Marketing.
Hiya, I'm Chloe and I'm a digital marketing manager here at AB. I've been here just under a year and I look after our clients' digital marketing. So anything from paid social to Google search, display and YouTube. I've worked with Russ previously and I'm delighted to join him and Paul today in co-hosting the webinar.
Hi everyone, my name's Paul Wright and I'm a senior data developer here at AB. I've been at AB for nearly 5 years, developing and managing websites for clients with a focus on data and how clients can best make use of the data to grow their business.
Excellent, thank you both. So quick reminder of the agenda today. So very quick fire 30-minute webinar aiming to cover the upcoming changes in advertising technology, focusing on Google Analytics 4, Google Privacy Sandbox. An understanding of the issues your business may face if relying on cookies as part of your marketing strategy. We're going to look specifically at the cookie banner and what you need to be considering from a legal perspective. And finally, drawing it all together, just some reminders of what you need to do now. So with that reminder of the agenda, Chloe and Paul, over to you.
Thanks, Russ. So the rising concern on how our data is being used is rising amongst the general public, and consumers are demanding greater privacy, including more choice, control and transparency of how their data is being used by business. With this in mind and the industry and regulatory changes that are coming up, which we're going to try and cover today, it's going to shake up the way that we do things in marketing and advertising, especially in digital marketing, where we're all used to using universal analytics, and we currently rely heavily on third-party cookies to market to audiences on Google. So yeah, this is all changing. So we do have a lot to go through, and it's only 30 minutes, so we're going to be touching on these subjects, but some of the changes that we want to talk through today are Google Analytics 4, and the only, which is going to be the only form of data collection in July 2023. The browser restrictions on the use of third-party cookies, and also the increased focus on giving users control of their personal data. So together with associated changes in law and other things that are coming, this really impacts businesses and how we're going to be able to use personal data within marketing. Hopefully, we're going to give you a good overview of what you need to be thinking about now before these changes fully come into play. So just a quick recap on a few of the things that we're going to be talking about, which may be a bit, maybe you might not know what they mean. So personal data, any information relating to an identified or identifiable person. And then onto the cookies. So a cookie is a small file of letters and numbers that are downloaded on your computer when you visit a website. Many websites actually use cookies and they do a number of things. So they're not all bad, like we all have heard. And actually without cookies, to be honest, the internet wouldn't function the way it does today. But today we're mainly going to be focusing on those first-party cookies and third-party cookies. So the difference between the two is that first-party cookies are set by the website you are visiting. So you as a business will set first-party cookies and you use them to aid your customer when they visit you. So it can do things like storing login details, set language preferences, and it's also what you use as a business to collect data in analytics. And then third-party cookies are set by another domain than the one you are visiting. So for example, Google Ads will set a third-party cookie on a website and it will monitor where users go. It's actually the main technology used in remarketing tactics for Google Ads. So this is where you've probably experienced it before, but you're shown an ad about a product that you've actually searched previously, but you're being shown on a different website. So that's cookies. And the first big change that we're going to discuss today is Google Analytics 4. So you've all heard Google Analytics 4 is coming, and Google will begin to phase out, or in their terms, sunset, its current data collection platform, which is Universal Analytics. So from July next year, if you wish to track your website data, you are going to have to do this through GA4. Because GA4 is effectively a brand new data collection platform, none of your existing data from your Universal Analytics is actually going to be moved across. So see it as a clean slate, but if you're going to want to access that data after the switchover, you are going to need to download this and export before the 1st of July 2023. It might sound quite scary that Universal is going, but actually change is a really good thing. You've also got plenty of time to do it, so please don't panic. Universal is now 10 years old, and quite frankly, it's really out of date when it comes to fitting in with the way of how digital marketing has changed. And yeah, GA4 just helps to bridge those gaps a little bit more. As I said, you've got just under a year to do this, so you don't have to do this change overnight, and you can actually switch on and start collecting data in GA4 now, and have both platforms running side by side for the next year. This also gives you a bit of time to understand how GA4 works and other events and reporting that you want to be collecting in it. So some of the key changes that are coming with GA4 that's different to Universal. So there are no more multiple views. All of your data, is going to be captured under one property, and it's going to be called data streams. And Google Analytics 4 actually now collects data for both websites and apps. Data in GA4 is referred to as events. So events refer to all of your user actions. So for example, a click or a page view, both of them are classified as events. There's no more last click as the only form of attribution. So for those in digital marketing, probably be rejoicing. Multiple attribution models are now going to be available for displaying your data across all of your channels. So that's both your paid and your organic. And this will help you as a business to understand how your customers have reached your site, so via your paid ads or your organic, but also how they've converted. Google Analytics 4 is designed with privacy at its core, so it's going to help businesses meet these needs, or these rising needs from the users on the data and the privacy. So, for example, GA4 is actually not going to be relying exclusively on cookies, and will fill in your data gaps where you've got this rising number of cookie policy opt-outs with machine learning. And finally, another notable change is that IP addresses are not going to be tracked, but instead Google has created a number of other ways to support user identity cases within GA4. So what does this mean to you as a business? So as we touched on, you have just under a year now to switch over. And if you don't switch over by the 1st of July, then you're not going to be tracking any data or recording any data from your website in the Google property. As I said, we do highly recommend that you look into switching over as soon as possible, so you have that year, one to get used to it, but also for any year-on-year comparisons, which your future self will probably thank you for. Another way that Google Analytics 4 is going to impact you as a business is that there are certain settings that you need to be aware of, which are governed by your own privacy and data policies. So Google Analytics 4 it makes you acknowledge that you have the right to use the data that you're collecting. So that pictured on the slide there, you can see the user data acknowledgement. So you do need to actively acknowledge that you have the necessary disclosures to obtain the data. And then there's also another section that we want to draw your attention to. It's called Google Signals. In layman's terms, it's actually the analytics feature. So if you use your Google ads for search ads or display ads, this connector actually helps you to collect data and use that data in your ads for remarketing and demographic reporting. So it's worth turning that one on if you do ads via Google Ads. The other thing that you need to be aware about is data retention. So in GA4, your data retention is actually automatically set to 2 months. You can amend this to 14, but you do need to be transparent to your customers that you are collecting their data and storing it for 14 months. And finally, we'll be touching on this in a few slides' time, but the browser reg changes to third-party cookies will have an impact on how you collect data. So you just need to be aware that you're going to have to start relying more heavily on your own data collected through first-party cookies, and probably a lot of your conversion data will be based on modeling, so it might not be a true reflection of your customer data. So I'm just going to hand you over to Paul, who's going to talk you through the death of the third-party cookie and the technology being developed to overcome this.
Thanks, Chloe. So last year, Google announced that its Chrome browser would phase out third-party cookies by the end of 2023. Google had been a bit slow with this change, as both Apple Safari and Firefox browsers began blocking third-party cookies several years ago. Google have been slow to implement this phase out of third-party cookies because their business model relies so heavily on the information obtained by third-party cookies, unlike Apple. So why then is this such a big deal now that Google are doing this? Simply because Google are by far the most widely used browser on the market worldwide. They control about 66% of all browsers used, compared to Apple Safari's 19%. They also control the largest advertising platform on the internet, Google Ads, used by most advertisers and website owners. So the delayed phase out of third-party cookies by Google has been to allow them to develop ways to phase out the cookies without destroying the entire internet advertising ecosystem. The name for their solution is the Privacy Sandbox, which I'll talk more about in a moment. Okay, over to you, Chloe.
Thanks. So what does the death of the third-party cookie mean to you as a business? Well, to be honest, we're not 100% clear on how big of an impact this is going to have, but on the whole, we do know that it's going to be quite big. The future of marketing in the cookieless world is still being discussed and designed by the big tech companies, but there are a few things that we do know. So number one, the future is all about consent. Consent is a must-have. This shouldn't really be new to anyone. It is already currently law, and we'll touch on this a bit later. But going forward, all of your digital marketing efforts will be dictated by your cookie preferences and data consent, and you're going to have to be transparent as a business about the way that you collect data, and you're also going to have to respect users' decisions about opting in and also opting out of cookies at any point in time. Number two, remarketing tactics will be changing. So, as I said before, most of our remarketing techniques currently rely heavily on third-party cookies. It's how many of our remarketing lists have been built in Google to date. And, you know, as we said, third-party cookies track a user's journey across the web. So it then shows the ads that you've about products that you've previously searched at a later stage. So you're now going to have to just rely on your first-party data and your website visitors who have opted in to be able to remarket to people, but it's not going to be the same, and you're not going to be able to surface ads using third-party cookie remarketing technique any longer. And finally, you're going to have more significant gaps in your conversion data, and the return on investment in your digital marketing efforts is going to be bigger. So proving investment in digital marketing is about to get harder, makes my job a lot more difficult. The loss of cookies is resulting in the inability to be able to connect the dots between the conversions that we see and the ads that we're putting out, and also with a lot more people opting out of cookie tracking, it's seeing a decline in conversions and subsequently then reducing the ROI of your digital marketing. GA4 is obviously going to help with that in terms of filling in those gaps with predictive modeling, but it's, like I said, it's not going to be a true reflection of exactly what's happening. Paul's now going to take you through, though, what's being talked about to bridge the loss of the third-party cookie gap.
Thanks, Chloe. So in recent years, website users have become more aware of their data being used, shared and monetized, often without their knowledge or consent. And tech companies have now woken up to the problem and are working at ways to make the internet more safe and secure for users. Google, though, make their money from advertising and personal data, so they just can't turn off third-party cookies until a replacement's in place. The Privacy Sandbox is Google's answer to a world without third-party cookies. Announced in 2019, the Privacy Sandbox is a heading for multiple different initiatives that aim to allow websites and advertisers to access users' information without compromising privacy. The various proposals cover 4 main areas: ad targeting, ad delivery, ad performance reporting, and user privacy. So within ad targeting, there are 2 proposals, Topics and Turtle Dove. Both are designed to ensure that advertisers can provide personalized adverts without the need to collect and store personally identifiable information. Topics works to learn about your interests as you move around the web, but importantly, retaining the data within the browser and not holding personal data about the user. Turtle Dove is one of their most complicated solutions, but it aims to allow advertisers to retarget customers so that websites can still display ads that are relevant to their users, but without relying on third-party cookies. This means that those adverts that follow you around the internet will still appear. Under the ad delivery banner, Google Privacy Sandbox is working on 2 proposals, Fenced Frames and the Trust Token API. Fenced Frames is a new security and privacy feature that's designed to get around privacy and security issues with iframes. Ad code will be able to be delivered to a website, but the advertiser will be unable to gather any personal information. And the Trust Tokens API aims to reduce ad fraud. For example, where bots can click on an advert of a rival advertiser to increase their spending. Instead of having to complete reCAPTCHA boxes on every website you visit to prove you're human, the Trust Token aims to prove you're human once to the browser, and then the browser confirm that you're human to all the other websites. Ad performance reporting is essential for advertisers to learn what is and isn't working and to adjust ad campaigns accordingly. To assist with this, Google Sandbox is working on 2 proposals, the Attribution Reporting API and the Conversions Measurement API. Attribution reporting aims to make it possible to measure when an ad is clicked or view leads to a conversion on an advertiser's site, such as a sale or a sign up, without the need for a third-party cookie. And conversion measurement will allow advertisers to find out whether their users were converted either by clicking on the ad or by buying the product that was advertised without revealing any of the user's personal information. Of course, at the heart of all their solutions, the Privacy Sandbox is eager to ensure greater user privacy. The 2 proposals working to achieve this are the Same Site attribute and the privacy budget. A new attribute called Same Site has been added to cookie code to help browsers identify third-party cookies so that they could be blocked in future. This feature was actually implemented in 2020. And the privacy budget limits the use of information so that sites can't collect enough information to identify an internet user personally. Known as fingerprinting, even without personal information, you can be identified using available information about your machine, such as screen size, machine type, location, etc. The privacy budget will limit how much of this information is available. Except for Same Site, all of the proposals I've talked about here are just that, proposals that are being discussed with no timetable to when or what the final implementation will look like. Some proposals have already changed dramatically since they were announced, and some may never come to fruition. At AB, we're going to be keeping an eye on these changes over the next couple of years and updating our clients and how these changes will affect them in the future. Now, over to Russ to have a look at some of the legal requirements.
Excellent. Well, thanks, Chloe and Paul. So first of all, we've obviously looked at some of the technology changes being pushed through by the likes of Google. Before I go into the legal requirements, it's also important just to look at what is actually happening out there. So some stats. So number one, the ICO, the Information Commissioner's Office, which is the UK data protection regulator, in 2020 and 2021 received a total of 1,837 complaints specifically on cookies. So we can see this is a live issue that consumers are willing to and users are willing to draw to the attention of the regulator. Second point, the fines are increasing all the time. So Amazon is currently in the lead for the largest fine issued by the Luxembourg Data Protection Authority, a staggering 746 million euros. The issue is understood to relate to consent to use of personal data for marketing purposes. We don't have the full details because it's being appealed by Amazon, but the point here is large fines are being levied against the big tech companies, but this filters down obviously to individual website operators who ultimately may be using technology from those companies to deliver services. Thirdly, a study carried out by the DMA shows that a very high percentage of individuals, so 79% of consumers, deem it's important to know how their personal data is being used by companies at the point that they're sharing it. So there's a real element of trust here. This is very important so that we're being transparent about and showing that we're being transparent about the use of data. And finally, in 2019, a study by Statista found that only 12% of the 680 UK websites that they reviewed were GDPR compliant, and that the customer management platforms they were using did not meet the legal requirements. So right through the chain, we're seeing a lot of lack of awareness, dissatisfaction from consumers, and ultimately businesses not necessarily understanding their compliance requirement. So taking all with that background, I wanted to look at the specifically at the cookie banner and the issues that surround use of cookies. So that's kind of the starting point of your user engagement with cookies. So as you'll no doubt be aware, a cookie banner is a notice that's displayed on a website to request the user consent to the placement of cookies on their device. Consent is not required for what we call essential cookies. So for example, if you've got a cookie that tracks the contents of a web shopping basket, and consent's not required for that, otherwise the site just fundamentally wouldn't work. The primary regulations that you need to be aware of that are referenced on the slide regarding use of cookies for targeting and marketing to individuals in the UK are the extremely long titled Privacy and Electronic Communications Regulations 2003, helpfully abbreviated to PECA. But also you need to be aware of the Data Protection Act 2018, which sets out the requirements for processing personal data that may be collected using cookies. There's a bit of an overlap of regimes. Broadly, the requirements that you need to be aware of are that you need to give the user the option to accept or reject non-essential cookies, with both options having equal prominence. Provide the option to select or deselect any non-essential cookies. Provide clear and comprehensive information. So that comes back to that point around transparency of what you're doing with the data. And then finally, and importantly, have a separate consent mechanism that is distinct from other terms and conditions. So not bundling it with the user accepting your sales terms and conditions, for example. Here's the bit that obviously we all care about, which is the fines for non-compliance. So I mentioned there are the two regimes here. The first and primary regulations are the PECA, and the fines for non-compliance of those requirements are up to £500,000 currently. However, under the Data Protection Act 2018, there is a much higher cap that applies, and you've seen in the example of Amazon how far that can go, and that's the greater of £17.5 million or 4% of annual worldwide turnover. So a very high number to be aware of. Obviously, that's a sliding scale. It depends on the provisions that haven't been complied with. Next slide, please, Chloe. So just to give you a quick example of some non-compliant cookie banners. So here we see in the first example, you have controls present, you have an accept button, but they're not actually equally prominent. The reject button is down in the bottom left-hand corner. Secondly, we have no option for the user to make a choice, even if those controls are actually set out in the more information button. It's not clear to users. So what does a compliant cookie banner look like? Funnily enough, we went to the Information Commission Office's website to get an example of that. Here you'll see you've got separate accept and reject buttons, equally prominent, and then further down you've got a granular choice to toggle on and off analytics cookies in this instance. So a quick look at what you need to be doing now. I've set out just a few high-level things you should definitely be thinking about and acting on. So number one, and most importantly, check your policies. The law requires you provide clear and comprehensive information to your users concerning use of cookies utilized and concerning use of any personal data that you're collecting. Typically, this content is set out in a privacy notice and, as best practice, a separate cookie notice that can easily be accessed by users. You'll recall that one of the features of GA4 that Chloe was mentioning is that data can be retained between 2 and 14 months. And as Chloe touched on, we actually need to communicate this to users. So this is something that should be set out in your policies as best practice. Sometimes you'll see that in privacy and policies, it refers to a retention policy being available on request, but it's best practice to set that out up front. Secondly, make sure users can actually manage their preferences. It sounds obvious, but for consent to be valid, the legal requirement is it has to be as easy to withdraw as it is to give. From a practical perspective, you need to make sure that users can do this. How many websites you go to where you can actually make the selection and you have no idea how to amend those preferences afterwards? That's something to bear in mind. Thirdly, consider whether you actually have consent for your intended purposes. The law requires that consent must be specific and informed. So you'll recall from the earlier slide that Chloe presented, Google require you to give that very broad acknowledgement that you've adequately informed and obtained necessary rights from the end user for Google to process the personal data. So from a practical perspective, you need to look at the design and content of your banners and notices to ensure that users actually have been adequately informed. Again, how many times we go onto a site and you just simply can't understand the cookie banner you're looking at? It's really worth taking the time to invest in looking at how that displays and is understood by users, because in turn that develops the trust for the user to actually want to share the data with you and accept the cookie. Finally, quite an important point, be aware of changing laws. So there was recently consultation between the UK government and industry stakeholders, which led to a data protection and digital information bill being submitted for review. It actually, on the 18th of July, was submitted to the House of Commons. There's more time to go on this. There will need to be debate between MPs and a second reading of the bill. So expect change. However, I just wanted to highlight sort of a few key things to be aware of. So firstly, there's a move towards browser-based settings. The government specifically is looking at ways that users will be able to set their preferences via a settings function, most likely within a browser or other technology, to remove the need for all the multiple cookie banners that you currently see across the web and the so-called cookie banner fatigue. It's going to take time. We don't know exactly what that will look like in the end, but what it does mean is, again, tied into what Chloe and Paul have been saying, you're going to want to consider whether this feature may actually lead to reduced usage of cookies and therefore look at other means of sourcing data. Secondly, fines are being harmonized. So I referenced the two different regimes, PECA and Data Protection Act 2018. The intent is to use the higher threshold for fines, so doing away with the 500,000 cap for breach of PECA, using the upper level of the greater of 17.5 million or 4% of annual worldwide turnover. So this is something, again, you want to be aware of. Finally, one of the key points in the bill is that the intent is there'll be no consent required for basic functional analytics security cookies. So the bill is actually detailing some of those cookies that are in that list now, which we will be commenting on in due course. But ultimately, the requirement for consent for those basic cookies, which are considered to be non-privacy intrusive, will be removed. In each case, the user would simply need to be provided with clear and comprehensive information and the option to object, but not a opt-in consent box that you currently see. So rounding this all together, what do you need to do now? So as I've just touched on, check your policies and banners are compliant. As mentioned, it's a key requirement to ensure that the individuals whose personal data you're processing or devices that you're implementing cookies on are actually adequately informed and have a genuine choice regarding placement of those cookies and use of the data. So it's really critical to review those policies and update them. Secondly, know your cookies. Do a cookie audit. Make sure you know exactly which cookies are launching on your devices and browsers. It's never ceases to amaze me how many IT teams I talk to where you do an audit and you look at the list and go, we had no idea these cookies were firing. Critical, because you've got to let people know what those cookies are doing and be transparent about the usage.
So lay your foundations on Google. This webinar is predominantly focused on Google and Google Ads because when the third-party cookie comes to an end, it's going to have the most impact when this browser stops. And a lot of us use Google Ads for advertising. So to lay your foundations, you can switch on your GA4. So like we said, if you haven't already done so, now's the time to switch it on. Even if you're not ready to use it, you can still collect your data, use it alongside your universal analytics. And this transition doesn't have to happen overnight. So once you've switched it on, you can collect some data, get to grips with GA4, think about additional event tracking or conversion reporting that you want to be doing. And we're happy to help guide you through this if you need any help. Second part of laying your foundations is to implement the Google Global Site Tag. Having the global site tag implemented across your website actually helps with your conversion accuracy on your Google Ads. But don't worry, Google Ads will tell you in your recommendation section if this is not yet set up. And then finally, check for enhanced conversions on your Google Ads as well. So enhanced conversions allow for more accurate conversion measurement from your search and your YouTube ads without the use of cookies. So it does this by using hash data and matching to Google profiles. Obviously, there's a few prerequisites there. So the user has to be logged in to Google or has to have a Google profile. And it also only currently works for deep conversions. So that's conversions such as purchases or signups where you're requiring your user to enter in login details or collect some form of data from them. So enhanced conversions won't actually work for any conversions where you don't require the customer data to be filled out, such as outbound clicks, for example. Again, Google Ads will tell you if this is not yet set up.
And finally, consider your data strategy. The end of third-party cookies doesn't mean the end to your marketing, but it does mean you're going to have to adapt your strategy a bit to collect more customer-provided data instead. So a first-party data strategy means scalable customer acquisition, being better able to analyze and engage with individual user actions and scale these into customers and create lookalikes to these people. Data that's relevant to your actual customers, not a guess based on generic audiences. And then finally, that your data is compliant and auditable. Consent is captured firsthand and can be linked to customer profiles.
Excellent. Well, thanks, Chloe. Thanks, Paul. Well, thanks all again for your time today. I appreciate we're just over the half hour. Again, this is a complex and fast-moving area of law for businesses to keep up with, and the technology changes to go with it that Paul and Chloe have been outlining. So if you do have any questions about today's content, if you do need assistance reviewing any of your policies or generally looking at your compliance with the laws, then please do get in contact with me using the details on this slide. Be delighted to assist you.
And similarly, again, from myself and Paul, thanks everyone for joining. We really hope that it's been useful. Appreciate it's been a real quick overview. But if you have any questions on the sections that we've spoken about, so if we can help you with anything digital marketing, with your GA4 switchover, or if you'd like to discuss your website and cookie banner setup, then please do get in contact using the details on the slide. Or if you're really tech savvy, scan the QR codes and it will give you a link to connect with us on LinkedIn.
Thanks, everyone.
Excellent. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.